Well, good afternoon, everyone. And it's a delight on behalf of District Council to welcome you to this first of two housing funding forums addressing a critically important issue here in Muskoka. I want to start today with a land acknowledgement. In the spirit of reconciliation, we wish to acknowledge the enduring relationship between Indigenous peoples and the territories they traditionally occupied. We recognize and deeply appreciate the historic connection they have to this place, both the land and the water. We're grateful for the opportunity to meet here, and we thank all generations of Indigenous peoples who have taken care of this place and continue to care for it, and we want to show our respect. Hundreds of years after the first treaties were signed, they remain relevant today. May they guide our decisions and our actions. We commit to learn, to educate, to honor sacred places, and to take actions toward real truth and reconciliation. And I was reflecting in preparing for this forum today that one of the most important teachings that I am often reminded of by Indigenous leaders in our communities is to be able to think 7 generations ahead. And housing is one of those issues which affects multiple generations and which defies easy answers. We know the issue is a shortage of housing, particularly attainable and affordable housing, and particularly in Muskoka. But it is an issue that has roots in many different things: economics, politics, social decisions, demographics. And it's not as simple and easy issue to solve. But when I ran for district chair, I was asked by district council what the most important issue I thought affecting Muskoka was. And I answered housing. And the reason I said that is because it is so fundamental to everything else. Not only do our residents on modest incomes and our homeless and most vulnerable residents, they're experiencing a crisis right now in terms of the cost and the lack of availability of attainable housing in our communities. But it's hurting the economy as well. We hear this time and again from businesses that one of the things that makes it so challenging to bring employees to Muskoka and for their own employees is to find attainable housing that's affordable, or even can find, just to find it in our communities. So we know it's an essential issue. It is one of District Council's top issues. To that end, we have reconstituted our Housing Task Force 2.0, and we'll hear from the chair of that task force in a moment. But we wanted to do these funding forums right away, early on in the term of council, because there are programs and funding available at upper levels of government that we need to start bringing to Muskoka. We need to start seeing more of that funding flow to our communities. And that means projects, and that means applications. And that's what the district and its task force would like to help with. So I'm delighted to see such a great turnout on this call to hear about some of those funding opportunities. And of course, there will be a second forum in July to talk about some of the other programs that are available. So to all of you in the home building community who are joining us, construction industry, advocates, organizations, all of you, thank you for being here and for being part of the solution. It's going to take all of us to tackle this issue in Muskoka. Thank you very much, and I'll hand it back to you, Wade.
Thank you, Chair Lehman. It's my pleasure now to invite Mayor Alcock to address the forum.
Thank you very much, Wade. And I just want to say what a pleasure it is to be here today, and wish everybody a good afternoon. Again, my name is Nancy Alcock, and I am the current chair of the Community and Planning Services Committee at the District of Muskoka. And I have actually been in this role since 2018. My, how time flies. I'm also the current mayor in the town of Huntsville. And following on the remarks of our chair, housing has been a critical and #1 issue, not only at the district, but certainly at the town of Huntsville, since I was first elected on council, and that was 2014. I know that we we started working right away at the town level to try and figure out new approaches and new strategies to get affordable housing or alternative housing out in the market. And so, to Chair Lehman's point, it's a really complicated issue, and no matter how earnest you are, there are so many obstacles and issues that seem to present themselves as we try and find these alternative solutions. And thus why we created the first go round of the Muskoka Housing Task Force, and that I had the pleasure of chairing that first task force from 2019 to 2021. And the reason why it went into remission for a while is a number of very good suggestions, alternatives, proposals came out of that task force. And indeed, the district has followed up on a number of those. But certainly, again, given the last election, and to Chair Lehman's point, one more time, the urgency of grappling with this incredibly important issue has certainly in the forefront once again. And so I'm really thrilled that District Council has agreed to start the Housing Task Force again with 2.0, with Mayor Kelly as the new chair. And I should say that in 2019, the Community and Planning Services Committee adopted the Housing for Everyone, District of Muskoka's 10-year housing and homelessness plan. And the plan had 4 key objectives that I think it's really important to highlight today, because we are still working very diligently trying to achieve these objectives. And that is to drive the creation of new attainable housing, to provide support and align our services to improve the housing stability for all, and to optimize current housing assets, and partner to create supports to address homelessness. And thus, it's really thrilling to see how many participants are here today to talk about potential funding opportunities. And finally, it's with these strategies of the Housing and Homelessness Plan, the Community and Planning Services Committee will continue to focus on the promotion and support the much needed housing supply in Muskoka. So with that, I really wish every success with this conference today. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Alcock. I'm now going to invite Mayor Kelly to address the funding forum.
There we go. Thank you very much. I want to welcome everybody and tell you how impressed I am with the numbers that have turned out. I think Mayor Alcock mentioned that already. Bid you a good afternoon. I'm glad to have you here. For those of you who know me, I can be uncharacteristic. No, I can be very long in my speech, but I'm not going to be today for 2 reasons. We got much better things to hear about than me. And secondly, I am a little under the weather from this ash storm we're in. I have some lung issues and they've been aggravated by this. So I'm going to stick to pretty well the basics. My name is Peter Kelly, and I was recently appointed as the chair of the Muskoka Housing Task Force, what we're calling 2.0, by the District Municipality of Muskoka. Just by way of background, I am a retired corporate lawyer, currently serving as the mayor of the Township of Muskoka Lakes, and I have served since about 2015 on several Muskoka-based nonprofit organizations, so have a grounding in that. Key thing for me is I ran for mayor. I'm not a natural born politician, but I did run for mayor largely on the basis that I wanted to build or rebuild the community. And central to that is the opportunity to make housing available to those who want to live here and be part of our community. And so this mandate dovetails quite nicely with my goals and ambitions as the mayor of Muskoka Lakes. I want to do really just 3 more quick things before I hand it back to Wade. Number one, we all owe a huge debt of gratitude. Many thanks to our predecessors from Housing Task Force 1.0. And as Mayor Alcock mentioned, she chaired that group. I have had the opportunity to take a look at who participated over the many years on that 1.0 task force. And it's an impressive mix of builders and developers, of municipal staff, municipal politicians, all involved because they have one thing in common, and that is a concern and a passion to do better in terms of making attainable and affordable housing available to those who wish to live here. Second thing I want to comment on is 2.0, this current iteration of the task force. Its primary focus is going to be on implementing many of the ideas, concepts, and recommendations that we have available to us thanks to the hard work of 1.0. They have left us a really good roadmap. And my goal as chair, and hopefully our goal as a task force, will be to put it into action and actually get stuff built. The last thing I want to say, we haven't done it yet, but we will very shortly be calling for membership on Task Force 2.0. Watch for that. And to the extent that anyone can help us and feels they have value to add, we'd love to hear from you. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Moderator Matthews.
Thank you so much, Matt Kelly. Before I invite our first guest speaker to address the forum, just a couple of housekeeping issues. First of all, as you'll note, everybody's camera and microphone, camera has been shut off and microphone has been muted. That's intentional. We'll just be having the speaker's video and microphone on at the appropriate times. If you do have any issue, technical or otherwise, feel free to add something to the chat, and just make sure that you are addressing the moderator, myself, or one of my co-hosts, Jackie Evans or Cheryl Bessie, and we will deal with your question. And that will be particularly important as we go through our guest speakers today, because you'll be invited to ask questions of our speakers, and you can direct those questions to me through the chat. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our first guest speaker to the forum, and that is Jeff Colabash from the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you, Wade. I'm just starting my video here. Yeah, thank you so much. And I just want to introduce myself. First of all, I want to thank the district and staff and the respective mayors as well for inviting me here on behalf of the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation to do this presentation on some of our CMHC housing solutions. My name is Jeff Colabash, and I'm a specialist for the Ontario Multi-Unit Client Solutions sector of our corporation. So, and I handle Northern Ontario. So my area actually starts from Muskoka and it goes right up to the Ontario-Manitoba border. So that is all my geographical jurisdiction. So I basically handle all the programs that you're going to be looking at today. I'm basically your first point of contact on these programs. And I'm here to promote the programs, and we're going to try to work with you to try and find the right financing solution for your project as we move forward. So just a little bit of background. I've been with the corporation for 13 years in same role, but different titles. But prior to this, I was a principal planner for the town of Gravenhurst. A few years back, let me just say it that way. So I know the area. I have very strong relationships still in that area. So I was really looking forward to doing this presentation for everybody here, and I'm really excited about the number of people that are attending this forum. This is really good to hear. There's going to be a lot of high-level information here throughout my presentation. So there could be questions at this point, during the presentation, or at the end, whatever the moderator feels. But just so you know, my contact information, in addition to this slide deck, I believe is going to be provided to everybody attending. You will have my contact information, so you will be able to contact me directly after this forum. So please feel free to do that when you have an opportunity, if you want to do that. I'm just going to stop my video because I'm just going to be, so you can concentrate on the slide deck instead of looking at my mug all afternoon. So I'm just going to do that. And if I can see, let's just go to the next slide, please. Okay, so, all right. So the National Housing Strategy represents a shift in what CMHC have been doing before. Everyone, when I first started with the corporation, they just thought, well, all you guys do is mortgage loan insurance. And we've done so much more since mortgage loan insurance was our first foray into housing. So what we're looking at is it's all about three things: the National Housing Strategy: people, communities, and partnerships. And for the people aspect, we want to build safe, affordable homes, and we also want to give priority to those in need. With communities, we want to align our supports with public investments to deliver on identified local needs. And we want to support investments that address climate change and accessibility issues. And then with partnerships, we advocate for transparency and accountability in all of our partnerships, whether that's with the private sector or the nonprofit sector, and also between federal, provincial, and municipal governments, and in this case, with a regional government like yourself. Next slide, please. So our vision here is for social inclusion, which includes, but not limited to, affordability, accessibility, access to support services, etc. These are very important when we're looking at all of our programs. We have social outcomes that we want to address, and those form the basis for when we are reviewing applications to ensure that they are meeting those social outcomes as per the National Housing Strategy, and then subsequently through the programs that are there. Next slide, please. So the National Housing Strategy is about people first, as I indicated earlier. So we have priority groups that you can see in this slide that have been identified. This is an important part to ensure that the social outcomes we're looking for can reach down into the communities. So you can see there's a number of various groups that are there. So when we're looking at our applications, one of the key things that we look at is, are these priority groups being targeted? When they are being targeted, then it allows for, more score, like a higher scoring for prioritization, because you're looking at those groups. Next slide, please. So all of our programs, in a general sense, follow this prioritization criteria. We support populations that are in need. We must include a depth and duration of affordability. We need access to amenities, have accessibility features, and support energy efficiency goals. Now, the partnerships are a central feature of the National Housing Strategy. Most of our programs require that federal funding must be supplemented by investments from another source or partner, such as another level of government, to ensure coordination of investments. So that's very important that people remember that partnerships is very key. Again, it would help with applications being scored a little bit higher because those partnerships are in there. If the partnerships aren't in there in an application, for example, we will work with you to see if there's any partnerships that can be coming out of the local area. So we work with you on that aspect as well. Next slide, please. So how do we actualize the social outcome priorities of the National Housing Strategy? We have financing incentives that you can see above to ensure project viability. And the financial viability is top of mind. We want to ensure that projects are sustainable over the long term and align with our appetite for risk. So whenever we look at any of our programs, we do have a sector, I'm in client solutions. We do have a sector called financial solutions. So they underwrite all of our files with the exception of rental construction financing. And I'll talk about that later. So they underwrite all of our files. So we are doing our due diligence from our end when we're underwriting files, just like banks doing their due diligence when they're underwriting for mortgages, just a regular mortgage for a homeowner. Partnerships, we have multiple stakeholders, and it reflects a local consensus about project viability and broader expertise around the table. So this could be the province, could be the municipality, it could be the district, community organizations, it could be developers, innovators, etc. Under affordability, depending on the product with CMHC, we have different criteria for defining affordability. but we ask that borrowers make a commitment to maintaining that affordability for at least 10 years. And some of the programs, it's a minimum of 20 years. And I'll get into that with those programs. We also have energy efficiency and accessibility requirements, and we have different criteria depending on the program. And we have different financing incentives to make it feasible, such as, as it says in the slide, lower interest rates, equity requirements, longer amortization, lower debt coverage ratio, longer loan terms. So those are some of those financial incentives that we have if you go through us for our funding. Next slide, please. Now, some of these programs and products can be stacked. So, for example, our co-investment fund and our mortgage loan insurance select program can be stacked. Our programs can also be stacked with other programs from other government sources, such as, at the provincial and municipal levels. Or they can be stacked with organizations such as, for example, the Green Municipal Fund that is done through the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. So we do have stackability, and if a client is looking at stacking, then we will have that discussion to ensure that we can stack with it. And when we do stacking, we will look at, if there's two programs, we look at the more restrictive of the two. Example, if the affordability is defined differently under one program as opposed to other, we look for the definition that is more restrictive. And I'm just using that word not to, just for lack of a better term, but it is making sure that whatever is more restrictive, then it's going to apply to the other program that's being applied for. Next, please. Now you can see here we have there's many phases of development. So we have a range of initiatives that span the full housing development process, from pre-development to project stabilization. And in some cases, the program is designed to address the pre-development phase and assist with soft costs, as is the case with seed funding program. Other programs can also span from the pre-development phase all the way through to the rent-up stabilization phase. Next slide, please. And our products also span a range of housing types. However, some initiatives you can see by this chart are designed to apply specifically to some types of housing while not applicable to others. So what that does is it gives a proponent a range of programs that they can look at depending on what they're proposing to do, and we can have those discussions about those various programs that may be applicable. And what it comes down to at the end of the day, most of the time, is when there's numbers crunched for programs, that's where the determination of what makes the most sense for a proponent to do a project, depending on the funding program, because they want to make sure that it's viable. And sometimes when the numbers are crunched in one program, they won't really make sense, or it's something that the proponent's not comfortable with. So they will have discussions about other programs that may be an option. So today I'm going to speak at a very high level to some of the programs, which include seed funding, the Innovation Fund, the Housing Accelerator Fund, co-investment funding, rental construction financing, and mortgage loan insurance select. So again, as I alluded to earlier, this is very high level. There's a lot of information in here. I don't expect you to, understand and take it all in this particular session. So that's why I want you to feel free to reach out to me subsequent to this session for anything more that's into the weeds, and we can have a discussion about that, or discuss specific proposals that you're looking at and what may be the best fit. Next slide, please. So the first one is seed funding. This is a very popular product. It's intended to support the pre-development stage to determine project feasibility and get projects off the ground and into our application pipeline. Now, due to overwhelming demand for seed funding, a large number of applications are awaiting to be processed. So because of the large number of applications, we actually it forced us to close the seed funding application portal as of March 23rd of this year to process the current volume of applications and to ensure we do not surpass our remaining budget. So that's very important to know. Like it's so popular that the funding for last year's budget and this year's budget basically has been fully allocated for. But as we go through the process of reviewing these, there might be some funding that may be available, but we'll have to see what that's going to look like. We just don't know right now. So applications for seed, which have already been approved, will continue to receive funding as per their agreements. And if funding remains after processing all of these current applications, we will reopen our portal to accept new requests later this year. Otherwise, it will not reopen until funding is renewed in budget 2024. And usually that would be, our fiscal year goes to the end of March, so it would be as of April of next year. But as I said, if there is funding that we do have available after we process all the existing applications, we will open the portal again. But this does not affect our preservation fund, which will remain open to proponents that are or were under a federal operating agreement. Next slide, please. So seed funding can provide non-repayable contributions and or interest-free loans to assist with the planning costs of building a new affordable housing project. And it can also provide contributions to help preserve existing community housing projects so that they remain viable and sustainable. The reason I'm still talking about seed is because I want everybody in this session to be aware of what is there should that application portal be open again, that they can look at accessing this funding. So that's why I'm going through this, even though the portal's closed right now. So the new construction stream supports costs for completing pre-development activities related to the construction of new affordable housing supply. So our maximum contribution under seed would be a maximum of 150,000. So that's our maximum. So as it says, we can go up to that amount, but it doesn't mean that everybody gets it. So I just want people to understand that when we have these amounts like this, that it goes up to that value, but it doesn't mean that everybody is getting that. It all depends on the nature of the application and the strength of it and what they're proposing to do. So we will look at that. The maximum loan that we do under seed is up to $350,000. We may require security where required, but I haven't seen it in my travels so far in my area. And the loan for seed is interest-free. Okay, so just keep that in mind, that it will be interest-free. And we do have parameters by which all of the work under the program that has been agreed to under the agreement has to be done by. So under the preservation stream, the maximum contribution is $50,000 per community housing project. And the maximum amount could be increased to $75,000, where the housing provider can clearly demonstrate how they provide housing to a greater number of low-income households. Next slide, please. So the seed funding may be available to a wide range of individuals and organizations, as you can see in this slide. However, seed preservation is only open to community housing sector groups who were previously under a federally administered operating agreement, or to those transferred under a social housing agreement whose federal operating agreements have ended. So if there's anybody in this session that may be under that and they want to ensure, like, am I eligible for the preservation stream, please feel free to reach out to me and we can take a look in the system and see if you actually fall under that. Most organizations know whether they do or not. Next slide, please. So as I've mentioned, the application window closed on March 23rd, and this is where we're going to, determine how much money we have left for the new applications. And it's also what it's allowing us to do is change the way seed funding is delivered. And I'll talk to that now. So next slide, please. So effective March, I just want to make sure something here, excuse me. Okay, sorry. So effective March 23rd, we are providing funding using an incremental approach based on what stage of development the project is in. The new staged approach allows us to work alongside our clients and offer funding as they move their projects along. It also allows us to support projects earlier on and continue to offer funding without the need for detailed resubmissions, because this was happening before when we seed applications come in and they do a certain amount of work. And then if they thought, well, we have to do some more work. And then it was like, okay, now they had to resubmit, put new information in there. And so we just went, this is a pain point for clients. So this is how we're trying to address one of those pain points. And what this also allows us to do is to better track spending and align with our budgets. To that end, one big change to the program is that once an application is approved, invoices for funding must be received by December 31st of the year the application is approved. The intent here is to better track spending and have a better sense of funds remaining in the budget line, which will help us smooth out the process and avoid budget shortfalls. So when we look at their stages as the slide shows, so stage 1, we can go up to $20,000 in contribution. Stage 2, we can go up to $60,000 in contribution. And then stage 3, we can go up to $70,000 in contribution. And at stage 3, we can also go into approving of loans up to $350,000. They can be offered at this stage as required, but the first 2 stages are strictly contribution, so it means it doesn't have to be paid back. So under the stage 1, the concept development pre-design phase, so typical activities here would be analysis of need and demand. It could be a business plan. It could be preliminary financial feasibility. Under, whoops, sorry, I'm jumping around here in my notes. And then under the schematic design, typical activities there are energy modeling study, environmental site assessments, planning fees, a professional appraisal, site surveys. So those are some of the ones that are there. And on stage 3, when you look at the preliminary design or the design development, some of the typical activities here are construction cost estimates, development permits, and project drawings and specifications. So when a client comes in and they're looking at applying for this, we'll take a look. And that's part of the role that I have, is we take a look at exactly what you're doing, and then we see where you are with respect to each stage, so that when it goes to our financial solutions team that reviews these, they have a clear idea of what stage you're at and what the funding might look like. Next slide, please. So the next one is the Affordable Housing Innovation Fund. We can go to the next slide. So the Innovation Fund encourages new funding models and innovative building techniques in the affordable housing sectors. The innovation is the core criteria of the fund. Without innovation, we cannot give financial assistance. So I'll get into exactly what type of innovation we're looking at. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So there's 3 different kinds. There's transformational, breakthrough, and incremental. And so incremental consists of minor improvements in existing products, services, or processes. Okay, so these are improvements that we tend to see nearly every day as businesses look to remain competitive and profitable. Breakthrough innovation means that innovations bring meaningful change by providing something demonstrably new, which pushes beyond the new and improved incremental level. And then when we look at transformational innovation, it's typically turn the existing processes, products, or services on their head, which may even make those previous processes, products, or services at risk of becoming obsolete. And just at a very simplistic level, if somebody comes in and say, I've got an innovative idea, I want to basically throw some solar panels on the roof of our multi-res buildings and to help with the energy efficiency of that. That's not innovative because it's being done everywhere, okay? But something that is innovative is, I think it was in British Columbia, where they actually had a piece of land and they put housing on it, but the housing can actually be removed and then put in a different area on a different plot of land. So and it's multi-res, so it's not like a single detached dwelling. So it is multi-res building. So that's sort of an example of innovative. And when we're dealing with innovation, what we do is we have myself involved in the discussion with a client, in addition to our innovation team, to make sure that we're going down the right path. And that we're not, nobody's wasting their time and resources thinking that, well, this is innovative when maybe it hasn't been done. So we have all of these programs that we're talking about. We have teams on these, so we draw from those teams in order to ensure that we're having strong applications go through. And that's part of my role, is to ensure that, because I'm representing Northern Ontario, is that we do have strong applications come through, because it's for the benefit of everybody in our area. So, you know, we're not the Torontos, we're not the Vancouvers or the Montreals or the Ottawas of the world. We're smaller communities, we're rural communities. So, you know, we want to make sure that if somebody's proposing something in the area, that we're going to have strong application before the innovation committee. Next slide, please. So we're seeking unique ideas to revolutionize the affordable housing sector, new ways of making housing more accessible and lowering the costs and risks associated with housing projects. The fund for innovation covers both new construction projects and the repair and renewal of existing housing supply. Next slide, please. If I'm going too fast, somebody can just sort of let me know if I'm going too fast. There's a lot of information to cover here, so hopefully I'm not. But anyway, so eligibility applicants can include municipalities, private sector developers and builders, nonprofit housing providers, as well as community housing organizations. So it's pretty well open to anybody. The fund will prioritize projects that exceed mandatory requirements, maximize the number of partners and additional investments, and address the needs of vulnerable populations. It's really key to keep that in mind about exceeding mandatory requirements. It doesn't matter what program you're dealing with CMHC for this funding. If you're exceeding mandatory requirements, and it's a strong project, your chances of being prioritized to be basically moving along to that approval stage is a lot higher. If you come in and you're just meeting the minimum requirements, it's going to be a little bit more difficult, because these programs are national programs. So we are competing with everybody across the country. I don't have a certain amount of money, budget, that is strictly for Northern Ontario. So all the funding that we're talking about today is on a national basis. So we are competing. So that's why I say part of my role is to work with you in order to get a strong project before our various sectors when they review them for approvals. Next slide, please. So the innovation fund applications must meet specific criteria to qualify. First, the applicants must demonstrate the use of innovative solutions, such as new financing models or unique designs that overcome barriers and lower the costs and risks associated with housing projects. Second, at least 5 units or renovations or retrofits must be considered affordable. The minimum 5 unit is for all of our programs, just so you know. Affordability, based on the affordability criteria of the municipality where the project is located, that can be deemed as affordable. Now, if there's no municipal criteria showing what affordability is, then we can determine the affordability for rental housing projects based on average market rent. But the subject property rent must be below the average market rent for new construction based on our CMHC data for recently built properties. Third, applicants must demonstrate how a project will remain affordable for at least 10 years. Some of the programs that we have, other programs we have, is the affordability is 20 years minimum. The fourth criterion is demonstrate how a project will achieve a minimum 10% decrease in energy intensity and greenhouse gas emissions. Fifth, at least 10% of the units must meet accessibility requirements. Sixth, the units must demonstrate that they can be viable while decreasing or eliminating the need for ongoing government subsidies. Whole idea is when we're having these things built is that we're not relying on the government to continue to operate these buildings, because when we're dealing with funding like that, then that might affect our funding for these particular projects that are moving forward. So that is very key without the government subsidies. Now, there might be other government subsidies at the provincial level that are used, and that's definitely a benefit for a project, and it will be recognized when we're looking at that partnership piece when we're reviewing an application. And applicants will receive a higher score if their projects show added value in terms of replicability, access to transit, or serving vulnerable populations. So that's key to keep in mind under the Innovation Fund. Next slide, please. So the next one is the Housing Accelerator Fund. You can go to the next slide. So the Housing Accelerator Fund is a $4 billion contribution program that's going to run until 2026, 2027. And what this fund does is it encourages local governments to implement initiatives that will speed up housing development and increase supply. It will achieve this through incentivizing lasting systemic changes that reduce barriers to housing supply and development approvals, and over the long run, make housing more affordable to everyone living in Canada. So that's very important to us. Can you go back a slide? I think we're, go back again. Okay, let's just leave it there. It looks like there's a slide that's missing. I apologize. Yeah, we'll talk about co-investment in a second. So I'll just finish up on the Accelerated Fund. A critical distinction between the Housing Accelerated Fund and other CMHC administered programs is that this fund is more like a bilateral agreement with another level of government. CMHC is not directly providing funding or underwriting housing projects here. Okay, so, and the aim is that the application for this particular fund, for the Housing Accelerator Fund, is going to be open in our portal in late June or early July of this year. We just don't know the exact day yet. And then there's a 45-day application period. Okay, and that 45 days is 45 calendar days, not business days. So we're looking at, if we go late June, early July, we're probably looking mid to late August when that will be closed. And it's my understanding that it will be opened up again, I believe in the new year, but don't hold me on that. I'm not sure if it's in the new year or not, because the program does run until 2026, 2027. So it depends on applications coming through as well. If there's a lot of applications coming in, this way it works with all of our programming, and the money is basically going to be eaten up, we think, then we may have to close the portal like we did with SEED. So, okay, so, okay, see here. Okay, so eligibility, and I apologize to the people attending this. There's a couple slides that are missing. That's my bad, and I'll make sure that those go to the district before they send this out to everybody. So under the Accelerated Fund, local governments within Canada, including First Nations, Métis, and Inuit governments who have delegated authority over land use planning and development approvals, are eligible to apply to the Housing Accelerator Fund. In the absence of a municipal level authority, a regional district or province or territory that has authority for land use planning and development approvals can also apply. So there's two streams under the Housing Accelerator Fund. There's what's called a large or urban stream, and this is for jurisdictions located anywhere in Canada with a population, this is 2021 census data, equal to or greater than 10,000, excluding those within a territory or an Indigenous community. And then our second stream is a small rural north and Indigenous stream. And this is for a jurisdiction located anywhere in Canada with a population less than 10,000 or within one of the territories or an Indigenous community. The applicants will be required to provide certain information in their applications. And one of the key things is they need to develop an action plan, including the prescribed minimum number of initiatives. There's a number of initiatives that are, and that's right on our website for large urban stream and for the small rural north and Indigenous stream. And their applicants are encouraged but not required to select from a list of initiatives that reflect common practices in urban planning. Example of some of these initiatives that I'm alluding to within the action plan can include allowing for increased density on a single lot, encouraging accessory dwelling units, incorporating a climate adaptability plan to the official community plan, implementing inclusionary zoning, etc. The initiatives that the applicant proposes must demonstrate alignment to the development of complete, low carbon, climate resilient communities that are affordable, inclusive, equitable, and diverse. And under the Accelerated Fund, they have to commit to a housing supply growth target within the action plan that increases the average annual rate of growth by a minimum of 10%. Also must complete or update a housing needs assessment and include a reoccurring scheduled review date within the report to ensure that the needs assessment is kept current. Evaluation of the applications are based on 4 categories: commitment to increase the housing supply, relevance of the initiative outcomes to one or more of the objectives of the Housing Accelerator Fund, the effectiveness of the initiative in increasing the housing supply, and the need for an increased housing supply. All initiatives that are outlined in the applicant's action plan will be individually assessed and scored. Okay, now we're back to the National Housing Co-Investment. So I apologize to the attendees for the last few slides that you didn't see. So the co-investment fund, or COI as we call it, is kind of our flagship fund that started with National Housing Strategy. What this fund is about, it's more about addressing the demand for the most vulnerable and can be accessed by municipalities, district social service boards, Indigenous governments or organizations, for-profit developers, nonprofits, etc. Given the nature of the projects, funding may include limited grant contributions. Okay, right now, that number, because of the uptake of this program and the contributions that were with some of these projects that were approved, right now we're looking at up to a maximum of $25,000 per unit in contribution under this program. That's what it is right now. Now, depending how budgets go on that or appropriations are, that money may increase. But right now, what I'm seeing is we're there for probably a bit, maybe till maybe next year, just on that contribution side. So, but just keep in mind, this is a loan first program, so it's not all about contribution. Now, as I alluded to earlier, all projects in this particular program must have a minimum of 5 units or beds, and the primary use has to be residential. Next slide, please. So these funds can be used for urban Indigenous community housing, community and affordable housing, mixed use market and affordable rental housing, new construction and or conversion from a non-residential use to affordable multi-unit housing, transitional and supportive housing, as well as shelters. One thing to keep in mind when we're looking at like mixed use market and affordable renting housing, we know that when clients come through the door and they want to do some affordable rental housing, we understand you can't do all the units at affordable levels because it's hard to make it a viable project. And we don't want to see any of these projects, basically go into default. So that's why a lot of clients, they will do at least the minimum percentage of affordable units in a project. And then they also mix in some market units in there as well, because it will help the viability of the project moving forward. Next slide, please. So the National Housing Co-Investment Fund, again, there are the 2 streams. So the minimum investment under new construction from our perspective is $1 million. And then on the renovation side, our minimum investment there would be $250,000. Okay, so those are the minimum. So I've seen projects, not necessarily all in my area, but I've seen projects for 5, 6, 10 million. I've also seen projects out there for, hundreds of millions of dollars under this program. So it is a wide array of projects that are approved. And just so you know, it's not just for the big cities. None of our programs are for the big cities only. They're to address all communities across the country. Some programs may be a better fit for a smaller community, where other ones might be a better fit for a large community. But we work through those options with you as we look at your proposal. Next slide, please. So there are minimum requirements for the co-investment fund, and the applications will be scored on social outcomes and additional criteria aligned with government priorities, such as addressing the needs of target populations, which we talked about before, and meeting aspects of social inclusion, such as proximity to public transport and services, etc. Partnerships are a central feature of this fund. And I indicated this before, federal funding must be supplemented by investments from another level of government, such as municipalities, province, and or territories, to ensure coordination of investments. Or another partner can come in. So, we've even seen banks as being partners on some of these, even though it means a mortgage with them, but they are considered a partner. And the partnerships can be financial or in kind. So, for example, if a client comes in and they want to do a multi-res project for affordable housing under co-investment, and the local municipality has said, you know what, we're going to waive all of our building permit fees. We're gonna defer taxes for 10 years. Anything like that. So any of those incentives that, for example, that the district has, can be considered as part of that in-kind or financial partnership. So that's key. So it's about having those conversations with your local municipality and the district where it makes sense that there might be an opportunity to have a partnership on that side with respect to financial or in-kind services. Affordability under this particular program, that rents must be kept for a minimum of, have a minimum of 30% of the units below 80% of the median market rent, and commit for a minimum of 20 years. So when we're looking at that, if somebody comes in there going, okay, we're going to do those units at 79% of the median market rent for affordable units, for those 30% of the units, that's fine. But if you go lower than 79%, say you come in, you know what, we're going to do 65 or 70%, and we're going to do 40 or 50% of the units at that, again, all else being equal, and the numbers making sense and making it viable, then that becomes a stronger application. Because again, as I alluded to earlier, you're not just meeting the minimum requirements, you're going above and beyond, but it still has to be viable. So that's part of when we're working together on your application, we will look at that and see, as we're basically going through a pro forma, and we're going through it and we're looking at it and we're saying, okay, if we can't do it here, maybe we can tweak it here or tweak it there, whatever it may be. But that's part of our role, is to help you with that as well. For energy efficiency, new projects must demonstrate that they will either achieve a 25% decrease in energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions relative to the 2015 National Energy Code or the 2015 National Building Code, or it can have a 15% decrease relative to the 2017 National Energy Code for buildings. For accessibility, there are two options. Option one, 20% of all units within the project must meet or exceed accessibility standards. And option two, the entire project has full universal accessibility design. Just so you know, not only are you going to get a copy of all this information, but all of this information is on our website, just so you know. So I hope you're not, just going crazy writing all these numbers down. They are all on the website as well. If you can't find them, just reach out to me and I'll definitely get the link for you. I just want to give you an example of flexibility that we did for National Housing Co-Investment. We had a file that was presented where it was retrofitting transitional housing units included in the shelter. There was actually 0% accessibility. So all of the other requirements of the program were not only met, but they were exceeded quite a bit. So what our reviewers did is they assessed the application as a whole, and given the project type and information presented, the application was approved as presented. So there can be some flexibilities, but we look at those on a case-by-case basis. But they've got to be, very strong for us to consider to have that flexibility. But just to keep that in mind, that we can do things like that as well. Again, here we go into the financial incentives, low interest loan. Oh, I'm sorry about that. I meant to go to the next slide. Low interest loan, the loan to cost could go up to 95%, amortization over 50 years. The DCR is at 1.0 for residential, 1.4 for non-residential. Again, we can go up to a maximum of 25,000 per unit for the forgivable loan. And when you see that loan to cost of up to 95%, that's the maximum we can go up to. but I don't see a lot that get up to that 95%. So the client should be coming in with some kind of equity, more than the 5% in order to make it a stronger application, because you will be competing with everybody else across the country. So we'll dive into that when we look at an application to see exactly where you can come in. If you can come in at, I'm just going to use a number of 80%. So you're only looking for 80% from us, and the rest is going to be coming in whichever way. So we can definitely look at that, and then it's on a case by case basis. Next slide, please. And we do have recently, in the last, I think it was last year, we also have co-investment fund for Black-led organizations. And basically it's $50 million over 5 years that's available to these Black-led organizations, both public and private. And it's going to help to build housing stock for Black households and increase the capacity of these groups to build in the future. So that's specific funding for those organizations that has been taken out of our overall co-investment fund. So that is an important part of the co-investment fund as well. Next slide, please. So these are just, I have a couple of examples, some projects. This one's in Nova Scotia. I think you can see on the slide, converting commercial space, 20 units in emergency shelter, on-site supports that deals with accessible beds, greenhouse gas reduction, and then it shows the partnerships. So that's key, right? There's a number of partnerships in Nova Scotia. So it's very important that those partnerships are there. And again, it will help make for a strong application. Next slide, please. This one is in Montreal. Again, families and low-income people, 169 units, $65 million project with 11.5 million that came from us. And then the other partners with the province of Quebec and the city of Montreal. And you can see by the previous slide and this slide, like, this isn't what we would call typical social housing. Like, this is what we deem affordable housing. So, there's a lot of work, time, effort that's put into these and the design of them. So they're not eyesores. They're actually very nice buildings, very, very well kept. A lot of amenities to them, so they help no matter what client group or tenant group is in there. It makes it a home for them, and it gives them that safe space again, which is very important. In my particular area, I had a co-investment application with the Legion, and I'm sorry I don't have pictures on this one yet, but they're still building it. But it was done with the Legion in Sault Ste. Marie. There was the existing Legion building was on site, and then it came to decide that they had to do something with the building. So the Legion chose to partner with a local developer, so Saldan Developments, and redevelop the building and to include their traditional bar, a museum of what they've done in the past there. And they have an upper level with 107 apartments, 35 of which will be affordable units intended for veterans. And then the remainder will be, they might do more, but the remainder will be at market rent. So that helps with the viability of the project. The cost of this building is about $34 million to construct. The Legion provided the property as its cash contribution to the project, and the developer matched that amount. And the remainder has been taken out as a loan from CMHC. So probably close to between 28 and $30 million on that particular project. So even like in Sault Ste. Marie, it's not a large community, but it's still like, I think about 75, 80,000 there. But still, that's a major project for the Legion. And we're hoping that this will lead to other Legions across the country when they see this kind of a prototype, that maybe they'll be interested in doing something in their particular communities. And that may be something that that can be looked at within the District of Muskoka as well. Next slide, please. So how am I doing on timing here? Okay, 2:30, okay. So the next one is our rental construction financing initiative. And so this one, it supports sustainable apartment projects in areas where there is a need for additional rental supply. There's a higher priority given to projects with access to public transit and partnerships between for-profit and or not-for-profit developers, urban indigenous groups and municipalities, as well as projects having other government supports and land donations. Next slide, please. So the rental construction financing initiatives, I'll just RCF. It offers low-cost loans during the riskiest phases of financing development, so construction, rent up, and stabilization. We have a 10-year term with one low interest rate and 50-year amortization period available. This complements and is compatible with local affordable housing programs and initiatives. Now, just as we look at not only with co-investment and rental construction financing, and then the one I'm going to talk about at the end is the mortgage loan insurance select. We did have that spike in the interest rate yesterday. So when we have these interest rate hikes, it does affect us as well for our financing programs. So for example, with the interest rate hike yesterday, so we get numbers that come out to us every Thursday for our rental construction financing program, as well as our co-investment program. And we have viability. So when you're putting your pro forma together, which is part of the application for each of these programs, there will be a line item that says qualifying interest rate for CMHC. So right now, that qualifying interest rate, if I'm talking to a client today, I'm telling them you're putting in about 4.25 to 4.5%. So what that is, it's the qualifying rate. It's basically our stress test for your application. Should the interest rate get that high, we have to look at it that way, because if you were locking in at first advance, that number will be lower than your qualifying rate of 4.25, for example. It may be 2.75, it could be 3, it could be 3.25. It all depends what the interest rates look like at that time, and we would lock you in at that first advance for that 10-year period. So I'm hoping, because yesterday's interest rate hike was the highest in 22 years. So I'm hoping for everybody's benefit, not only from a multi-res side, but even on a home ownership side, that we're not going to be continually dealing with these interest rate hikes, because it does affect us, where the interest rate hikes impact developers, as well as any other organization or municipality when they want to look at taking loans out with us, that there's still going to be an increase, right? There's an effect on it. Whereas when these programs first came out a few years back, I know there's a program I think was under rental construction where they were at that time, a few years back, they were locked in for 10 years at 1.25%. And those rates aren't there anymore. So we have to stress test. So that's why right now, if a client called me and said, what am I using for my viability assessment in my pro forma? I'd be saying 4.25, but I would also say, because it's so close, that I would say you might want to look at 4.5 as well. So you can do two different scenarios just to make sure that if something happens, right, that it's still a viable project. And that's what we do for our due diligence for underwriting as well on these applications. Next slide, please. So the rental construction financing, so some of the requirements we look at is the markets with rental vacancy rates below 3%. Municipal approvals in place or in progress, building permits available, again, minimum of 5 units, the $1 million loan amount, and your net worth has to be 25% of the loan amount. That is key under rental construction financing. And the rental construction financing, when applications come in, we have subcontracted this to CMLS. So they're the ones that underwrite all of our RCF files. So that's who we're working with on that. So, but we are doing the lending, not CMLS. Next slide, please. So this is one of the announced projects in PEI, 7-story, 70-unit development with 2 floors, 30 units. It will feature below market rental units that are allocated to the PEI Housing Corporation. And this is taking tenants off their wait list that are rent geared to income. And it's located right in the heart of the city. So 30 units are affordable, and then the other 40 units will be at market rent. Next slide, please. This one's in downtown Toronto. Basically, this project represents a major new supply of purpose-built rental housing in downtown Toronto, where vacancy rates when they were looking at it in 2018 were 1.1%. So obviously it met that threshold of below 3%. If the vacancy rate is a little bit higher, I would ask a client to, you know what, let's still have the discussion so we can see exactly what the issue is. If it's like 3.1, 3.2, I'd look at the area and I'd have a talk with our rental construction financing team and see if, look, do we have an appetite for this? Because this one's at 3.1, 3.2%. So we will have that discussion. There was one project that was done that's actually being built right now, just outside of Sudbury. It's part of Sudbury in a small community called Coniston. And this building is a low carbon, high performance, all electric 55 unit multi-residential building that was done for the Coniston Nonprofit Senior Housing Corporation. So they were the applicants on this. And the project in this one uses almost 40% less energy, has a 39% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, and a 33% reduction in peak demand. This one was about an $18 million in-loan funding under RCFI from CMHC for that particular project. And next slide, please. So now we're at MLI Select. So MLI basically is short form for mortgage loan insurance. It's available for both new construction and purchase and refinancing. So in this one, we don't do the lending on this. You would actually apply through an approved lender and commit to providing social outcomes in return for better financing options with the lender and us. The MLI Select is meant to be flexible and it works on a points-based system, which I'll discuss with you. Next slide, please. The main social outcomes that we're looking at under the MLI Select program is affordability, climate compatibility, and accessibility. So you see this is a recurring theme through all of our programs. Next slide, please. So here for qualification, though we offer greater levels of flexibility and incentives that are commensurate to the commitments made on affordability, climate, and accessibility. So the borrowers have the option to commit to a custom blend of the outcomes, which lets you tailor the outcomes to fit the project. This choice-based offering is designed to maximize outcomes while taking into account the fiscal realities and challenges that are there on the ground. And I'll explain what I mean in a second here. So next slide, please. So the eligible loan purposes for construction of residential housing, improvements on existing residential housing, purchase, refis, and purchase and conversion. So those are eligible loan purposes under the MLI Select. Next slide, please. And so under affordability, units considered affordable if it rents at a maximum of 30% of median renter income in the subject market. Again, your minimum 10-year affordability period is there on this program. Now, if you make an affordability commitment of 20 or more years, then you will be awarded more points, and I'll just show you how that works in a second. Next slide, please. So here you can see the affordability parameters, level 1, 2, and 3. It shows you based on the number of units that you're going to do at that affordability level of whether you're going to get 50, 70, or 100 points. So I'm just going to use an example. And so for level 2, if you're doing 15% of the units at that 30% of median renter income, you get 70 points. But then you say, you know what, CMHC, we want to do affordability for 20 or more years. We're going to do 20 years for sure. If that happens, now you're going to get an additional 30 points. Now with the 30 points, you meet our maximum of 100 points, which gives you the better flexibilities in the program. Next slide, please. Again, with climate, it's about the energy consumption reduction and greenhouse gas emissions. Again, you can see the various levels, 1, 2, and 3, and how the points are allocated. So again, even if you did, let me see. Yeah, if you do the 20%, so let me just backtrack. What you can do is you can take the affordability, climate, and the accessibility, and you can use a combination of 3, combination of 2, or maybe just 1, depending on the points that you're trying to achieve. We'll give you those flexibilities. Next slide, please. And there's only one level, only 2 levels for accessibility, 1 and 2, and then 20 and 30 points respectively. And you can see basically how they score the points depending on what type of accessibility you're going to be putting into the building. Next slide, please. So now we'll talk about the scoring system. Next slide, please. So this is where you can see where the scoring points come in. Okay, we see at the top, which is what we had just talked about, those 3 different charts for those for affordability, climate, and for accessibility. And then you see below what the flexibilities are based on that point scoring system. Okay, so the maximum, I always talk to clients about the maximum of 100 points gives you the most flexibility. And so when you see the premium, that 1.25%, so that's the premium that we would charge for the insuring of the product. Okay, so that's not your interest rate. Interest rate under mortgage loan insurance is determined by the lender, because the lender is basically doing the funding for this. It is not CMHC. We're insuring the product. Okay, now you could see that with the 100 points, your premium could be 1.25%, loan to cost up to 95%. And you see your DCR, your amortization. So depending on your point system will affect what the flexibilities are. But effective June 19th of this year, the premium rates under MLI Select, because we had to do a full review because we haven't touched any premium rates in years. So premium rates will increase by 1.55% for MLI Select properties. So that 1.25 will now be, as of June 19th, that will show as 2.8. Okay, and the same thing with the other ones, the 2.5 and the 2, they will go up by 1.55% as well. So that's effective June 19th. And the interest rates, as I alluded to earlier, for the MLI Select projects are determined by the lender. So under this program, you're basically you're going to the lender saying, we're interested in looking at this MLI Select program with CMHC, and they're going to say, okay, this is the information you need to gather for us to look at it, as in for the lender to look at it, and information documentation that CMHC needs for us to underwrite it for the mortgage loan insurance. So it's like going into a bank for your own mortgage for your home. It's the same idea. You're providing information to the lender and information that we require as well at the same time. And then we underwrite it from there. So large uptake in this program, very large uptake in this program. So processing these is a minimum 6 to 8 weeks minimum. There's so many, and again, this is national, right? So everybody is well, not everybody, but a lot of people are looking at this particular program now. Next slide, please. Again, we're just getting into, that's on the purchase and refinance side of things. So again, there's depending on what the point scoring is that you get, we'll give you those flexibilities. But we will work, or I will work with you. If you come in with an application, well, you won't have an application with me, but you'll have an initial proposal, and we can just start discussing it to see exactly what you can achieve doing this. A lot of clients that look at this program find it, I don't want to say easy, but somewhat easier to meet the parameters of the program, and they don't necessarily have to meet all 3. So they say, you know what, we're going to do the affordability and we're going to get that 100 points. Okay. So now they don't have to worry about climate or accessibility. So the climate, so the energy efficiency in that. But we all know full well that the Ontario Building Code addresses a lot of this anyway. So a lot of developers that are doing these buildings are meeting or exceeding these requirements anyway. So that's why some clients will just concentrate on the affordability side, whereas someone will say, you know what, we're going to do the energy efficiency and accessibility. We can get 100 points between those 2. So we don't have to worry about the affordability, because we're going to do all market, for example, and they can do that as well. So it all depends what your appetite is and what makes sense for what you want to do for your clients in that building. And obviously what you're looking at on a rate of return, depending who's applying. Next slide. Oh, okay. So I know that there's a lot of experience and expertise. Yeah, here we go. Okay, everybody see me now? So I know there's a lot of experience and expertise in the room, and that can be very valuable. As we tackle the problem of housing affordability, I hope that you'll reach out to CMHC, and if you're in my area, to myself, and look to your communities to create the best possible outcomes for our communities and support a new diverse generation of housing providers here in Ontario. And just for everybody's information, I am located in Sudbury, and I was born and raised here. So I am from Northern Ontario, even though you might see my information. If I send you an email, it'll say our York Street office. That's because that's where I'm tagged to. We don't have any points of service offices locally anymore. So that's what I'm tagged to, but I am based out of Sudbury, Ontario. So yeah, that's all I have. And I know it was a lot of information, and I really want to thank you for taking the time to listen to this. I know it was probably information overload. I hope it was somewhat interesting. But I think the most interesting part will be feedback with respect to, you people knocking on my door and saying, you know what, we want to talk about this program. We've got this project, or we've got these projects. We're here to work with you and find the best solution for you. So never be afraid to pick up that phone or send me an email, and we can definitely have a discussion and start the works on that. So that's all I have there, Wade. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Thanks very much, Jeff. I do have a couple of questions, if you don't mind hanging around to answer them
Sure.
for us, Jeff.
Yeah.
There was a lot of questions about whether Jeff's email address would be made available and his slides. Just to reassure everyone that you will receive an email from district staff with each of the presenters' slides and with their contact details. So you don't have to write this down right now, but you can if you like. The second question, Jeff, related to what is the construction financing rate as of today for a $1 million project?
So are we talking about, so we're looking at the interest rate?
The interest rate, yes.
So if somebody, it depends on the program, but I'll look at co-investment and rental construction financing because the rates are similar. If somebody was locking in today, they could be locking in, like I said before, it could range to 2.75, 3.25. But we won't know until, so if I give you that rate today, but you go through the whole process, and then when we lock you in at first advance, so we don't lock in an interest rate when you apply. The interest rate is actually locked in at first advance for a construction project. So, and that interest rate, whether it's $1 million or $10 million, it'll be basically the same, but underwriters will be able to determine that when they look at the project and where it's located, et cetera, et cetera. So I can just give you that kind of range, but it changes. Like I get new interest rates to talk to clients about viability, for when they're putting pro formas together for us for our application. I get those interest rates every week. So like today I got it, and it was the viability under pro forma for our application will be about 4.13. So I tell my clients put in 4.25, but stress test as well for 4.5. I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Jeff. My second question, or the second question from one of our guests, it's a developer who's wondering, if they got in contact with either you or the district, would you be able to tell them which program was optimal for them?
Well, we'd have to look at exactly what they're proposing to do. And we could definitely give them options and say, these are probably the top two that would make sense for you. And what I usually tell clients is, here's the information on the program. But what because it's all about dollars and cents. So what I would ask them to do is, here's the 2 programs that make most sense for you. Crunch the numbers, and then let's have a discussion once you crunch the numbers for each of those programs, so we could determine whether something can be tweaked, because one program might make more sense than another. But based on, the information that they give me, we can give them a general idea, but I can't say which one will be the best one, which one will be approved, because I don't have any control over that. But we can definitely have that discussion to give them those options. Absolutely.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. That's the end of the questions that we have for you today. So once again, I'd just like to thank you for your presentation and for all the information. And just to reassure guests that we'll be making Jeff's contact details available via email, and also his slide presentation today. So thank you very much, Jeff.
No, thank you, Wade. And I really want to thank district staff, Cheryl and Jackie, for bringing me on board for this. I look forward to a lot of questions and hopefully a lot of projects in the district. So you have my contact information. I will update the slides for you so that you get the one because there were 3 slides missing. I'll make sure that I get that to the district, and they will forward it out to the attendees. So thank you again for everybody for listening to my presentation, and I hope we get to do some work with you in the future. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks again, Jeff. So we are going to take a 10-minute break soon. But before we do, I'm going to invite our Commissioner of Community and Planning Services, Afona Zvias. She's just come on screen. And she's going to address a couple of issues in relation to the district and Canada's Canada Mortgage and Insurance Corporation.
Hi, thanks very much. And this is just building on the excellent presentation that Jeff Calabosh just did for us. And this is excellent information, and it's amazing to see how many people there are on this call listening to this information. So a couple of things just out of interest. I'd like to share with you that the vacancy rates across Muskoka range from 0 to 1.3%. In our 3 largest towns. So vacancy rates are definitely below that 3% threshold that Jeff was referring to. With respect to the Housing Accelerator Fund, we have district staff who actually are working very closely with our area municipalities to consider a range of initiatives that could be submitted to the Housing Accelerator Fund. So if any of you from the, kind of developer or nonprofit organization or other type of affiliated sector would like to actually have a conversation with the district or the area municipalities about that, we'd be really happy to have that conversation with you. I will note the Housing Accelerator Fund is unlike anything that we've worked with before. It's quite unique and presents us with some opportunities. And when Wade and the rest of the team does a follow-up email out, we can provide you with a contact person here for you to have a conversation with respect to that. And finally, there was interwoven throughout Jeff's presentation, there were a few comments on funding opportunities that might be available to the more historical social housing providers. And of course, in Ontario, we have that really unique situation, unlike the rest of Canada, where social housing providers largely fall within the realm of regional governments, including the District of Muskoka, with respect to our role as a service manager under the Housing Services Act. We would really welcome the opportunity to work with any of our nonprofit housing providers. If you have an idea for something you'd like to do to leverage your property or to access financing for repairs, again, just a reminder that please do have that conversation with the district first so that we can figure out how we can best fast track that application in concert with you and CMHC. So thanks, Wade, and the rest of the team for indulging a few of my comments there.
Thanks, Afona. So we are going to take a 10-minute break. It's 2:57 p.m, so perhaps we could reconvene at 3:07 p.m. Thanks very much, everyone. Welcome back, everybody. It's now my pleasure to introduce our second guest speaker for today. His name is Howie Wong, and he's the president of the Housing Investment Corporation. Howie, how are you this afternoon? And welcome to our forum.
Thanks very much, Wade, for the opportunity. A pleasure to speak at the forum. The purpose of my discussion today is really to talk about a brand new startup nonprofit mortgage lender dedicated to funding new housing development, affordable housing development in Canada. The name of the organization is HPC Housing Investment Corporation. It's a huge mouthful. And so the acronym, as you could imagine, is HIC. So when you think of HIC, if you think about the orange drink HIC, then that is the new startup nonprofit lender to the affordable housing sector in Canada. But before I talk about HIC, I wanted to maybe set the table a bit with a bit of information about myself. I'm the CEO of Housing Service Corporation. We are a statutory body that was created by the province of Ontario about 20 years ago when affordable housing was devolved from the province to municipalities. In their wisdom, they decide to create Housing Service Corporation. So we are basically tasked with providing specific business solutions that really leverage off the size of the Ontario sector, affordable housing sector, to provide specific business solutions. So for example, we are an insurance broker. We insure close to $40 billion of assets for about close to 800 providers across Ontario. We basically insure about 80% of all the affordable housing in Ontario. We're also an energy company. We purchase natural gas right from the wellhead in Alberta, bring it across the pipes into Ontario, and we sell on an annual basis to affordable housing providers in Ontario about 90 million cubic meters of gas, one of the largest group programs of its kind in North America. We're also a financial services company. Through our subsidiary in CASA, we are a registered mutual fund manager. We manage over $500 million of the capital reserves of providers. And so we offer up managed bond fund, equity fund, and more recently, we've introduced a high interest rate savings account. And in terms of other business lines, we also have engineers and staff and consultants. We have a very robust strategic consulting business, which I modestly call ourselves McKinsey of community housing in Ontario. We help providers and service managers on a number of things in terms of business condition audits, financial planning, community housing strategies, and 10-year capital plans. And so we have a very robust consulting practice supporting service managers across Ontario. In terms of slides, perhaps you can just advance 2 more slides. So let me now focus on HIC. Who is HIC? Well, HIC is, I said, a nonprofit Canadian mortgage lender, and we are dedicated to the affordable housing sector across Canada. And so this is an organization that was created by Housing Service Corporation, BC Housing, and Manitoba Housing, along with CMHC. And these partners basically saw the need to create HIC. So why HIC? Well, the challenge is that when you are developing affordable housing in Canada, you are basically building an infrastructure asset, a 40-year plus asset. But the challenge is that we in our sector are forced to really finance that infrastructure asset with 5-year, 7-year mortgages. And so there's a real disconnect between the life of the asset, 40 plus years, and the term of the financing. And so during the life of that asset, you're going to refinance it maybe 7-8 times. And every time you refinance that asset, you're going to be subject to interest rate risks. And so what we have offered up is basically fixed rate 30, 40-year loan mortgages. So what we offer up is basically a 40-year mortgage, for example, that will basically have a fixed rate with blended principal interest payments on a monthly basis. And at the end of the 40-year term, your mortgage is finished. So you've set it, forget it, move on. And so you really stabilize your project and your pro formas going forward. That's the beauty of the product we're offering up here. Very different from what Jeff mentioned earlier. CMHC offers up under the co-investment fund basically a 10-year loan. And so very good rates at 10 years, but at the end of 10 years, you're going to have to refinance it. That 10-year loan is usually has a 50-year AM. And so you might have another 10-year term, but every time you refinance the co-investment fund, you will have that interest rate risk. The difference is that under our program with a longer duration, you're paying a bit of a premium. So it's all about figuring out whether you are risk tolerant. If you're more risk tolerant, you might want to go with the shorter 10-year terms. Jeff mentioned roughly right now they're about 4.25 sensitivity analysis, sensitivity rates. If we did a loan for 40 years today, it'd be about 5.5%. So you are paying a premium for the certainty on a 40-year mortgage. And that's really the difference between what we're offering at High C versus everyone else, including CMHC. As I mentioned, our clients are all affordable housing providers. We have created ourselves dedicated to supporting nonprofits. So whether it's a nonprofit provider or a co-op, that's really the clients that we are looking to help with this nonprofit. What we do, and maybe this is of interest to Mayor Kelly and other corporate lawyers on the line, we raise money in the capital markets. We compete with the banks and all the other lenders in the capital markets, and we basically issue social bonds, ESG qualified social bonds, and we raise money 40 years, and then we on loan it to providers like yourself on the line. And so these are very efficient means. Basically, what we're offering up is 40-year fixed rate money at wholesale rates. We are also credit rated by Standard & Poor's because we issue these bonds in the capital markets. To date, all of our bonds have been purchased by Canada Life, a very savvy bond investor in the capital markets. So a couple of general comments I wanted to share with you based on what we've been seeing in the financing market at High C. And one is really addressing the equity gap. In terms of financing, when a project comes in, the first thing I look at really is the rent. What is the rent levels? Is it at close to market? Is it subsidized? Is it sort of in the middle somewhere, affordable rents? Because the rents really are the key to driving how much financing it'll support. When you look at the rents, you take off all the operating costs. What's left over is basically the debt service cash flow, and that will drive how much financing you can afford. And then whatever you can afford is a fixed amount, and then the balance really is the equity. So I actually go backwards in the way I analyze a pro forma or project when it comes in the office. I look at the rents, look at how much finance it'll support, and then I will look at the equity. And the equity itself can be grant money, it can be land, it can be all sorts of capital. The challenge for us in our sector is that it is challenging enough to really just debt service the financing. We in our sector, affordable housing, we cannot really afford to pay a return on equity. And that's the big challenge in all the models I've seen, is that we basically maxed out on this on the financing opportunity with the cash flows, and really have no ability to finance or any return on equity. In the traditional sense, what happens is that when you have an equity partner, that equity partner, say for example, if you were to buy shares on the public market, you would basically buy shares or equity, and you would get a small dividend, but your real return is when you sell the equity, when you sell the stock, and that's when you get the real lift and the real return. In our sector, if you're an equity partner, you don't have the opportunity really to sell our affordable housing project. So what has happened is that when equity people come into our sector and say, well, I'm an equity partner, but I need a certain return. Well, the returns are quite high. In all the projects I've seen equity returns even with impact equity investments, family offices. When they come in with equity investments, they always want to return north of 7-8%. To my mind, that's like expensive second mortgage. In our sector, the challenge for us is that we don't have enough equity, and when we bring it in, it tends to be very expensive. And so what I really have been encouraged is that at the end of the day, all we can really afford is free equity. And it really goes back to the notion of supportive housing or subsidized housing, is that affordable housing requires some type of subsidy from some level of government, and that subsidy has to be addressed at the equity level. The financing can be attained through the private sector, the banks, the credit unions, CMHC, and High C at very competitive rates. The real gap for us in our sector of affordable housing is the equity. And when I talk about equity, I'm talking about grants, land, and capital. The more it comes in as grant without any cost, the better and the more stable the project. And so really, it really speaks to what I've said to CMHC over the last couple of years, is that insofar as the National Housing Strategy, we've in the last sort of couple of years, they've deployed over $10 billion of financing, of which 20% roughly is equity in the form of basically grant money or free equity, and 80% financing. And I really encourage them to flip it around. What we need in our sector is basically 80% equity, no cost, and the financing 20% is fine. And whatever is needed on the financing, the gaps we can get in basically in the private sector. Very efficient private sector capital markets in Canada. And so that's really sort of the gist of this slide, is to really underscore that we need more equity in our sector to build more affordable housing, because at the end of the day, subsidized housing requires a subsidy, and the only subsidy that's available is really from all the levels of government, and that's really the equity box that we need to fill in that regard. The other thing is that, how do we achieve long-term sustainability? When we look at projects, we really are focused, as I said, on the rents. Is that when we lend on a 40-year term, we want to make sure that the rents will sustain not only the operations, but also the debt servicing obligation under a 40-year loan or mortgage. And so we are not interested in looking at 100% RGI, because 100% rent geared income requires some level of subsidy from government, and we don't have the comfort that government will be there for 40+ years until our mortgage is repaid. And so the other thing is that when we look at rents, if there's a big component of ongoing subsidy year over year, again, we walk away from that, because again, when we are loading on a 40-year term, we are very resistant to really relying on government to always come up with that subsidy, because after 5-10 years, they can always walk away. And then what really happens is that the pro forma or the project really starts to collapse at that point. So when we look at projects, what we want to see is what I call a mix of rents. Sure, we can have some rent guaranteed income, low end of rent, but also a lot of affordable rents and some very much market rents or close to market rents. Is having that range. And so some of the projects I talk about, we have basically seen situations where the RGI component is about 20%, affordable rents in the middle about 50%, with the balance 30%, about 85-90% of market rents. With that mixed rent approach, we have all approaches we funded to date do not require $1 of subsidies from any level of government. The projects cash flow for operations, capital reserves, set asides, and debt service really, really well. And that's the key type of project that we're looking for. And really, it speaks to how do we ensure the long-term sustainability of affordable housing, is that by having that level of mixed rents in the project really ensures the long-term sustainability. And so what we encourage is that when there is government subsidies or government support, let's move it all to the front end. Let's try to really put into the equity box, try to reduce the financing that's required so that it can debt service with just the mixed rents that we are talking about in the projects we funded to date. So that's really an important distinction from all the other projects you might have heard of until now, is that we really are just focused on mixed rents and long-term sustainability on the current operations and performance without any need for ongoing subsidies. So what does a typical high C loan look like? This is a schematic of some loans we've done, and I've just used some assumed numbers here. And going in, it's a $10 million bill, land and construction. And what we normally will provide is in this case, a $5 million first mortgage, roughly 50% mortgage with 50% equity. And for this example, I've used our blended construction takeout. What we have offered up and created is basically what we call a blended construction takeout mortgage. So basically, say you have a 40-year term. What this provides is that at the point you put the shovel in the ground, you basically fix your interest rate right from that point of construction right to the end. And so in the 40-year blended construction takeout, the first 3 years would be your typical construction interest only component. And then the balance of that term, 37 years, would be blended principal and interest payments. And then at the end, you either have a small bullet payment or the entire payout of the entire loan. The beauty of this loan, as I said, is that at the moment you put the shovel in the ground, your rates are fixed. So you don't have the notion of a construction loan followed by a takeout loan, and you don't really have any control on the interest rate at that end point after construction. In our case, well, this is sort of the typical loan, and this bit of a schematic here really sort of gives you a picture on how we approach our lending in terms of loans. The next slide is a schematic on some of the projects we funded to date. So far, we funded a number of projects in BC and Alberta. Our first round we did a couple of years ago was a takeout round in BC, Vancouver, and also Edmonton. Basically, we funded over $33 million in takeout financing. And the 30-year fixed rate at the time was basically 4.25%, and the 40-year fixed rate was a bit under 4.5%. And the Vancouver property, the Rail Yard Housing Co-op, was on leased land from the city of Vancouver, and the Parkdale was basically the 2 multi-res towers. And these were basically our first rounds that we funded. And then the construction round that we did back in 2021, this is the blended construction takeout, was also for Civita Londonderry project in Edmonton. In terms of information, this project build was $91 million on long-term lease land for $1 from the city of Edmonton. So in terms of municipal supports, it was a 6-year lease for $1 from the city of Edmonton. Of this $91 million construction build, $51 million was provided by the province of Alberta in terms of basically a forgivable loan. So essentially, what I referenced earlier was what I call grant money, free equity. And then we basically provided the balance of the financing at $40 million to complete the project. The project has just stabilized and is fully tenanted. And in this case, $40 million loan is at the fixed rate of 4.36. So this is sort of the loans in terms of the blended construction takeout. If you reflect back on the interest rates from a year or two years ago, these are extremely attractive rates compared to what we have currently. In terms of pro formas, I wanted to spend just a couple of minutes talking pro formas. And, these are things that we always look at in terms of developments. And there are always, you start off with development pro formas, which is basically sort of almost a whiteboard type of pro forma as to where your revenues are, what your costs will be and whatnot. And then as you start to move and you transition into the real estate pro formas, they get closer to completion, which is the actual numbers on how the project will sort of operate at and what's left over in terms of capital reserves and also for financing. And it's been a real challenge because in the last couple of years, these have been really challenging, and especially the last year, because since last, I'd say the summer, with interest rate increases across the board, it's really has made these real estate pro formas really challenging. A lot of pro formas that we saw last year basically didn't pencil out, because what happened is that when they started developing these pro formas maybe 2-3 years ago, they used assumed rates of 3%. Well, when the rates ran away from us to 4 and 5%, a lot of these pro formas didn't work anymore. And so currently, many projects, in fact, I would say all projects pretty well in the ground, have assumed rates much, much lower than what is currently required and require extreme amounts of equity. As I said, we haven't really financed anything since about summer of last year because we have not been able to identify any projects really penciled out in terms of the rates, because the performance just didn't work. So the increased rates have really, I think, put a sledgehammer to the affordable housing development in Canada. I haven't seen any new ones coming on stream at any significance, and all the ones that are currently on the ground are all under a significant stress in terms of a shortfall in equity because of the high cost of financing. And secondly, on top of that, during COVID, we've seen construction increases the cost of construction has gone up 30-40%. And so we add on to that not only the higher interest rate, the cost of financing, but also the cost of construction itself. It really has been a double whammy for us in the sector. So for 2023 at High C, unless there's something that comes along that dramatically changes that environment, we don't see much financing from High C for the next 12-18 months. 2024 might be a recovery year insofar as our sector, but right now we're just struggling as a sector across Canada just to complete the projects that are in the ground. It is challenging to really see new projects that will pencil out over the next 12-18 months. It's not to say that we won't adjust. In our sector, you think back maybe 20-30 years ago when the rates were much, much higher, actually double digits, we were still building, but we were building in a different scenario. We built with different pro formas, and we've been used to the low interest rate environment for so long that it will take some time for us as a sector to really adjust to the higher interest rates, especially since this week, Bank of Canada increased the rates another 25 basis points. We anticipate another increase potentially. So that will put a significant more stress on the sector in terms of development. The other takeaway I want for you from this slide is that basically, if you're looking to develop, you really need to get expertise. Many times I've seen providers come to us and they really don't have any experienced developers. They're really good operational people, but they're not good at development. And they're trying to basically, what I say, learn to develop using YouTube. And you should not do that. You've got to get the right professionals in. You've got to get your development consultants become basically the owner's advocate for you, because you need that, because the general contractors, the contractors, all the subs, all the architects, they are advisors to you, but at the end of the day, you need an owner's advocate. So I can't underscore the importance of having a development consultant who is working with you as your owner's advocate. So just coming back full circle to what I mentioned earlier is that balancing act between rental income, financing, and equity. It's always about trying to find that equilibrium. If you, for example, if you want easy equity and easy financing, then your rental income should be 100% market and you'll be fine. But that's not affordable housing. What we struggle with is how much further from market can we go down so that we can actually have sufficient financing. The more financing, the better, and the less equity, the better. Because in our sector, we have very limited equity, and to the extent we can multiply it through 1, 2, or 3 projects, then we try to do that and try to really maximize the financing. So there's always a tug of war. We're trying to find the equilibrium when you look at a project as between equity, financing, and rental income. As I said, in our projects that we financed to date, it's all about mixed income rental income that will then support a fair amount of financing, but at the end of the day, that equity has to come in very low cost or no cost. I've seen a lot of situations where a private equity comes in and said, we're ready to invest and be a partner with you, but they want an 8-9% return and they want their money back in 7 years. Well, that's not equity. To my mind, that's basically a very expensive second mortgage. So that concludes my presentation. We have a lot of resources on our website at housinginvestment.ca in terms of our lending criteria, underwriting checklists. We have a lot of webinars that are also on there, and happy to have you contact me too for information. And if you have any questions, let me throw it back to Wade.
Thanks, Howie. Thanks very much. We do have one question through the chat, which I'm hoping you can address. The question is around equity partners. Can you just expand a little bit on who you consider to be an equity partner, or who is the most likely equity partner for an affordable housing development?
There are a lot of equity partners who purport to be equity partners, but they're really not. They're just second mortgage lenders, to my mind. And I'm talking about impact investment. I'm talking about social impact. I'm talking about family offices. They always say, well, we're willing to take a reduced return on equity investments, but at the end of the day, they still want a return. And from what I've seen, those returns are usually north of 7-8% at a minimum. And at the end of the day, the project has to carry that additional what I call debt load. And if we can barely afford the first mortgage financing, then really, to my mind, that equity is not equity. It's really just a second mortgage. And so people are coming to us and say, we're equity investors, but I say, no, you're not. You're merely just what I call a sub-debt lender, or maybe just another mortgage lender. That's all you are. I haven't seen a true equity investor in our sector other than government. And to my mind, an equity investment, in order to really help us in our sector, has to be at no cost or low cost. And that is only government, to my mind.
Thanks for that clarification, Howie. So if there's no other questions, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. I'd just like to thank Howie very much for his presentation today, and for all the information he's provided. And just to reaffirm for guests on the forum today that Howie's presentation will be sent out to you by a district staff member, his presentation and his contact details. Thanks again, Howie. So that brings us to the end of our forum today. I just have a few administrative details to deliver to you before we wrap up. First of all, as I said just then, there'll be an email coming out from a district staff member, which will have the presentations of each of the speakers today and their contact details. Also in that email, you'll get a link to the video from today, or the recording from today's presentations. So you'll be able to view this again should you need to. I also want to let you know that we are having a second session. It's up here on the screen right now, July 6th at the same time, 1:30 p.m. to 4 p.m. And then finally, I'd just like to thank again Chair Lehman, Mayor Alcock and Mayor Kelly for their introductory comments today. I'd like to thank Jeff and Howie for their fantastic presentations with so much detail, for so much for us to take away. And finally, I'd like to thank all our forum guests today for joining us. And I hope that you can join us again on July 6th. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye now.